Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon News Report podcast. This is Mormon News Report number 170, the General Conference postgame show. I am Brant Malone. We are doing this via Facebook Live, but we're also doing this through audio, so all of you who listen to the podcast will be able to listen. And if you want to join Facebook, you can see our lovely faces. I am joined up top by Jenny Noonan Dye, over to the side, that side, by Ben Bernards, and John Dye is, I'm pointing behind me, but he's actually behind the scenes, and so we're doing it that way. Folks, a couple of quick things that we've got going on. Number one, thank you, everybody, for all the interaction we get from all of you. Thank you for those of you who support us on Patreon. Patreon is how we help fund the show, but we make sure the little hamster that's running on the wheel gets its little nugget to make sure that it keeps running and keeps the servers up and going. You could find all of that, patreon.com/Mormon News Report. If you sign up there, buck a show. That's all we ask. And guess what? You get the show ad-free. And once I'm done grad school, which not like I'm counting down, 4 more weeks until the semester is over, you're going to get a whole bunch of fun new stuff. That's number one. Number two, we're proud members of the Dialogue Podcast Network. So make sure you find everything over at dialoguejournal.com. Number three, and here's where I'm going to kind of kick it out and throw it to all of y'all. Number three, General Conference is over. Surprise, surprise. I don't know if there was any major announcements like we thought. I wish we did a show last week. We were all busy, but I just want to say, folks, I told you so. I knew we weren't going to get any announcements. You can't really have any major church announcements when you don't really have church for a year, but there was some newsworthy stuff that did happen. And so here's how we're going to do today's show. Number one, we already have a couple of people popping into the comments. So hello, Randall. Hello, Natalie. Thank you for joining us. If you have any thoughts on General Conference or the things that we're talking about, feel free to join in the comments. But here's what we're going to do today. We've all got thoughts. We've all got certain things that stood out to us about General Conference. And we are going to go, as you can see here on video, around the horn. And what we're going to do is each of us has brought in 1 or 2 things that we thought were most important. And for that, Jenny, I am going to turn it over to you. What were your thoughts on General Conference and what stood out to you about General Conference this past year?
Well, I have more than 1 or 2, but I will say this. Since President Oaks delivered his Sunday afternoon talk, I really have not been able to stop thinking about it. Only 2 things since he talked stood out to me. One was President Nelson announcing the temples and the way he said Burley, Idaho, almost as if he was surprised at that. Like, what? Burley? Okay, all right. I didn't know that. And then the other one was when Elder Christofferson had said, J. Golden Kimball once said, but it wasn't anything that we would know that J. Golden Kimball had said. So it was very interesting.
Isn't that where your ears perk up and go, excuse me, what? Are we gonna get a certain 4-letter word in General Conference? Is this finally gonna happen? And it wasn't really that way, was it?
Did not happen. But man, oh man, I'll tell you what. I don't know about your experience, but after not only Elder Gong's talk Saturday morning was very special, and Brent, I think you mentioned on Twitter that you would like to hear from him about the AAPI racism that's happening right now, and I think that he very gently did address it, even, or at least his feelings about it, sort of. And Sunday morning, especially, we saw there seemed to be throughout an emphasis on that this church is global, that it is an international church. They even gave the statistic that by 2025, church membership in Latin America will exceed in numbers church membership in the United States and Canada. And that's a big deal. So when President Oaks started his talk by saying, I'm going to talk about the Constitution, I was like, hold up. First, it's Easter. It's Easter. Secondly, what? Now, let me ask
you a question really quickly, Jenny. So when was this talk? This was Sunday afternoon, right?
First talk, yep.
And it's interesting that it happened on Sunday afternoon. Sunday morning is usually the Christ-centered time. Sunday afternoon, sometimes we get into some Mormon-centric topics. Saturday is its own special beast and animal. But we were doing an Easter dinner with my family. We invited my sister's family over, and I was trying not to be that guy that was like always on Twitter while we had family over. I couldn't help myself, though, especially when I heard President Oaks is talking, and especially when I saw that people were tweeting, I'd like to start my talk by talking about the Constitution, it was, oh boy, I need to brace for impact on this one. So it was a little bit weird that it happened on Sunday afternoon. Jenny, I'm bracing myself now. Do I need to brace myself now for some of the things that he talked about, talking about the Constitution, knowing President Oaks' personality for being one who is, como se dice, blunt, frank, got his own thoughts on things, and he's talking about the Constitution on Easter. The only question I have is, so how'd that go?
I'll tell you, it was not what I expected at all, even a little bit. I was kind of bracing myself, and man, oh man, he threw it down and set it on fire, I think is kind of what he did. Like I said, since he delivered that talk, I have not been able to stop thinking about it, really. Just so much in it. Now, he did give at the very beginning a little bit of his own, just kind of a summary of his professional experience, but he is an attorney. He's been a judge. This is his wheelhouse, right? If someone knows about the law, it's him. And so, but all that said, he still said, but the authority that I use to speak about this topic is that of an apostle of Jesus Christ. And
Jenny, one thing that you brought up is really good there that I liked is that he didn't say, I'm going to speak here because I was on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say because I know so much about the Constitution and y'all don't. He's saying, look, I'm an apostle, and my job as an apostle is to talk to the members of the church about current events. And I think this is kind of the challenge that the brethren and the sisters have to deal with is if they're going to be modern leaders, if they're going to be talking about current events, if they're going to tap into this modern continuing revelation, then that means that we're going to expect them to talk about problems that we're facing nowadays. Mm-hmm. I have heard and I have felt complaints in the past that sometimes talks feel very high level and general and vague and not applicable enough. It's like, okay, let's talk about charity, which is a good thing, but doesn't always address every single day-to-day problem. And so we would expect that leaders that are tapped into God would have some sort of an insight on a problem that we're facing nowadays. Yep. And sometimes that comes across as hey, I know it's Easter and I know that it's Sunday, but you know what? People in the United States, there's been some problems over the past 6 months. And a year ago in the previous conference, he spent some time talking about how Latter-day Saints would and should respond to elections. He said, we do not fight against, or we will accept peaceably the results of elections. And we saw how well that went over this past January. So now here he is. This felt like, to me, I realized this was like the continuation of his previous talk. You know what I mean? It's like he's following this up. And I think in some cases he was coming really close to calling out the members of the church that participated in the mobs, in the Stop the Steal campaigns, in the other threats of violence that came out there. And he says, look, in one quote that he said that I loved, quote, mobs and other groups of people cannot intervene to intimidate or force government action. The people exercise their power through elected representatives. And so here he is saying, okay, yeah, that's what we do. And at the same time, as a Latter-day Saint and as apostle, let's remember that this is where we are. And then I love how he tied it into the gospel setting where he says, look, there are going to be people with whom you disagree. It is never upon us to say that a good Latter-day Saint could not be a member of insert your favorite political party here. I remember my wife and I looked at each other, we're like high-fiving, we're like, woo, that's awesome, that's so fabulous. And of course, everyone's going to hear that and they're going to say, well, he was really talking about the other guys, or he was really talking about us or whatever. Right. But it was kind of like saying, this is what we needed to hear nowadays.
Yeah. So really Stephen brings up a good point, saying his talk will be used by everyone as applies to thee, not to me. And of course, we've all seen that. I do want to say, there are some quotes that came out of it or one in particular that I want to mention. He said, independent actions will sometimes require voters to support candidates or political parties or platforms whose other positions they cannot approve. And that's perfectly in line with all the statements the church has made about how we do not support one political party over another. You know, I just I do want to take a minute and address everyone who was frustrated about, just kind of, you know, branch off of what Ben just said. People who are not in the United States, and even people who are in the United States, who are frustrated that this was a very United States centric talk. I know that my own views are, I have my US citizen glasses on here, but as I've been thinking about this, I just want to thank everyone for their patience in that. I've seen some suggestions that perhaps this would have been better delivered on a regional or for US members only meeting. At the same time, if this is something that on Easter Sunday an apostle feels is important enough to discuss on a worldwide stage, it's pretty important. And I can only imagine, I just, thanks to everyone for indulging that. It was it was really important. And like you said, Ben, I mean, it's timely and it is his expertise, but more than that, the way he was able to tie it in as an apostle to the gospel. Did I just say that Elder Oaks' talk was my favorite in conference? I don't know. You tell me.
Especially Elder Oaks' talk about current events, about U.S. politics was your favorite. I would not have expected to hear that from you. But I want to touch on what Stephen said here, because I think that's really important. His talk will be used by everyone as applies to thee, not to me. And Stephen, I don't think you're wrong, but I think that really what he's been doing is you could tell that I'm trying really hard not to put words in his mouth or the First Presidency's mouth. But you can see from some of the statements that they've been making, from some of the speeches that they've done, I think they're getting a little bit frustrated with people not understanding the message that they're trying to give. When he gets up at BYU and says Black Lives Matter, it's almost as I'm trying to think, for someone with his personality and his views, which are well known, for him to get up there and say that specific phrase, that's something. And the only analogy that I can think of is it's close to what the church was going through with Charlottesville. If you remember what happened with Charlottesville, the church came out and made, forgive me, everybody, but they made a fairly tepid statement, trying to play a little bit of both sidesism and stuff like that. There was a few prominent white nationalists, white pride type of people who took that message, members of our church, and basically tried to run with it and said, see, like, I'm good, guys. The church had to come out with an even stronger statement to say, there are some of you who still don't get it. And I wonder if that is what's going on with President Oaks right now, where he's having to sit there and go, there are some of you that don't get it. So, Jenny, you're right. Yes, they could have done it on a regional basis. I think it was very important that it was done at General Conference to a worldwide audience, because the other thing that we need to think about, there are quite a few countries throughout the world who have seen what has happened to the United States, and there have been implications there, not only with how they handled their elections, but how they refer to the United States. And this was almost a symbol to members of our church in the United States and elsewhere that what happened was not acceptable. The political climate that we had was not acceptable. And I think it's so much more important for that messenger to be pretty stern, Dallin Oaks, and not someone like Jeffrey R. Holland, Dieter Uchtdorf, who might have a background in European politics, where they are a little bit more, compared to the United States, more liberal on things. No, this was Dallin Oaks. What more do you want? But the question is going to be, are people going to hear the message? Because that's what I think happens. I make this, there's quite a few times when I'm hearing a talk during General Conference, and I ask the question out loud and sometimes to Twitter, because I can't get off Twitter, who is this talk directed towards? And it's really interesting, because there are some people that go, it's directed to the world, it's directed to everybody. And that leads into Stephen's thought of, it's to thee, not me. But in a situation like this, no, I think this is us. And if we're not taking this time to be completely retrospective, and particularly if we're not taking this time for church leaders to get the politics out of our church services, then we're not taking the advice from General Conference.
And maybe, Brent, maybe the solution is not even, so it's in addition to getting the politics out of the services, it's rethinking how the politics plays a part in our lives. From my perspective, one of the challenges that we face in America is our sense of personal identity is inextricably woven together with our political ideology. And so when a person calls out a political party, we take it personally. And we have a very hard time separating the things of that party from our own personal values. And as a result, if a leader were to call out that party, then the people in that party would very likely feel very strongly, have a much stronger negative reaction. I mean, as a hypothetical, you already said, he said the phrase Black Lives Matter. Just imagine what kind of firestorm would have happened had President Oaks looked at the camera and said, I'm calling you out. Trump supporters, that was wrong. ... Mm-hmm. Or had he said, Biden supporters, the way that you're responding to January 6th, that was wrong. Right. Or Antifa, or, MAGA, whatever key phrase you choose. Had he called out one side or the other very specifically, I seriously think that the damage to a large percentage of American church members would have been catastrophic, and we would have seen even further ripples. And he knows that, and he knows that he has to play it on the safe side to say things that are just vague enough that those who have ears to hear will hear. And at the same time, it carries with it the risk that people may interpret it the wrong way, that they will use it as a sort of Rorschach test, where they will see in it what they choose to see. And he can say, okay, I've said what I needed to say. I hope it gets the message across. But if he were to go further one way or the other, the climate that we exist in could have tipped so many dominoes that it probably would have set back church relations several decades, if not longer.
You're right. And Jenny, I've got one last quick thought, and then I'll turn it over to you for anything that you want to add. But Ben, I think that a big part of that also is my sense is that what he's trying to tell people is there is no, as far as our politics within the church go, there is no room for extremism on either side. Like, that is not acceptable. I don't want to say acceptable. That's not appropriate. And we shouldn't be living our lives in that level of extremism. At the same time, I think what he was trying to do was he was trying to broaden the tent so that there are quite a few people, whether you're someone who lives in, I'm trying to think of a very, very politically liberal place, Seattle, Washington. I think that's safe to say. They're fairly politically neutral, liberal, right? Whether you're in a place like Seattle, Washington, or maybe, Jenny, Provo, Utah is fairly, Rexburg, Idaho is very conservative. I'm saying that I can say that one definitively, right? Whether you're a Mormon who is in Seattle, Washington, or in Rexburg, Idaho, there is a lot of room for you within our church. And at the same time, we should not be taking the attitude of, if you're not us, you're someone else. Because that, to me, is completely antithetical to everything that we do within the church. How on earth are you expected to love your neighbor if that's the attitude that you're fostering? Like, so completely inappropriate. And I will say, based on my own political leanings, I need to do a little bit of repenting. I need to be trying to listen to people and understanding their points of view and not tolerating the extremism, but also recognizing that there's room for a lot of people. As Laurel Thatcher Ulrich has said before, all God's critters got a place in the choir.
Yeah. Jenny, what were you going to add to that?
So just to go back to what Natalie had said, she had said earlier, honestly, this one is hard for me because I can't help but feel liberal viewpoints can be so damaging, in my opinion. And, Natalie, and that's why I'm grateful that that it was already brought up, that Ben was saying to for any person, specifically, I guess, an apostle or from the podium of General Conference, to come out and be direct and chide or cheer liberal or conservative or Republican or Democrat would only further divide. And that's not what this is about. And that's why I appreciate that it was, like Brent said, it was President Oaks, for crying out loud, that the message was coming from someone who is notably quite conservative from what we've seen. And yet that he took it, all of this interpretation was not from a liberal or a conservative, but from a gospel standpoint. When he gave his summary of at least five divinely inspired principles from the United States Constitution, the fifth one that he said was the vital purpose of the entire Constitution. We are to be governed by law and not by individuals. And our loyalty is to the Constitution and its principles and processes, not to any office holder. And without coming right out and saying it, if we look at what's happening right now politically, there is someone who was an office holder who is trying to get followers as an individual and not as anything having to do with the process of the Constitution. And so I feel like that's, to me, it's clear. But again, back to what Steven said, I mean, there are going to be people who take it completely the wrong way. And maybe that's why I loved it. Because it starts all this discussion. I know I just took a ton of time with that one, but I do also want to mention from Saturday morning, Elder Gary Stevenson. My goodness gracious. Now, I have a special place in my heart for Elder Stevenson for reasons that I think I don't know if I've shared before on the podcast. I won't share it today, but maybe another time. But his lessons, one of his points was, he said, kindness is a fundamental healing gospel principle. Having hearts knit together in unity and love toward one another has universal application to all Latter-day Saints, adults, youth, and children. And he took the time to speak to each of those, to all of those groups. And it was so wonderful. I love that he said, the Lord expects Latter-day Saints to teach that inclusion is a positive means towards unity and that exclusion leads to division. That's it. I mean, it could not be more clear. And for that, I was very, very grateful. I also loved Elder Renlund's talk, where he talks about things being unfair.
Oh yeah.
I mean, one thing that we talk about a lot in the church is our kind of propensity in our culture to force joy, or at least plow over sadness and grief when it comes to things like death or at a funeral. Yeah. And while there is joy and hope to be found in the resurrection and the blessings and promises of eternity, I did see someone say something about how, after Christ died on the cross that Saturday, they weren't joyful. They were sorrowful, and they didn't expand it to this, but it was unfair. And I just really like that he used the phrase infuriating unfairness. And that he said, when faced with unfairness, we can push ourselves away from God, or we can be drawn toward him for help and support. And I really loved the focus on the Savior there.
I'm with you there on that one, Jenny. We were talking with our kids last night about this, and I said, there are so many times in Mormonism when we try to ascribe meaning and explanation to tragedy, where when faced with the alternative, when faced with the reality that some things happen out of pure chaotic happenstance, or some things are due to the result of people making bad decisions, or just random chaos, or just absolute chance in this world, for a lot of us, that can feel absolutely terrifying, because it literally means that we do not know what's going to happen next. That for all of my efforts to be safe and to pray and to do everything that I can right, I could walk across the street right now and something tragic could happen. Mm-hmm. And it might happen to me, and then another person could go 10 decades and never have anything horrible happen to them. And the sheer chaotic randomness to all of that can seem overwhelmingly unfair, and it has brought more than one person to a certain level of existential dread about, well, then why is the purpose? And in that void, we try to ascribe that meaning. We try to say phrases like, God has a plan, it's going to be okay, God is in control, as if by placing somebody else's hand on the rudder, it gives us a sense of surety and safety that we're going to make it through the storm. When the reality is, our theology tells us that the purpose of being here is to learn how to be in a boat with nobody's hand on the rudders except for ours, and to be facing that storm at a time when God is going to sit back in the corner and fold his arms and absolutely weep while he watches us navigate this storm alone, when we're going to feel completely forsaken. And the only thing that we can do is cling on to each other, hold on to the bulwarks, and and assure each other that we're going to make it through and that sunlight is going to come out one more time. And it means that we have to find the people that have fallen out of the boat and bring them back in. It means that we have to learn how to be navigators through the stars and through whatever skills that we gain. And sometimes, despite all of our best efforts, things are still going to go wrong. And that is so infuriatingly unfair. But to have an apostle specifically call that out and to recognize it and to name it felt like it took the teeth out of the bite, and to say, yes, let's admit to everybody once and for all that sometimes there is no explanation. Sometimes it feels like it's an accident, and sometimes it just feels so unfair. And isn't that horrible? And yet, through it all, there is a God that still hears us and that hopes for us and that will heal us. And because of that, it's going to be okay. And maybe we can ascribe some sort of hope to knowing that it's going to be better at the end, if that helps. Maybe it can give us some sort of strength to know that God is aware of the unfairness of it all. And then maybe it can change our perspective on how we deal with it when we realize if there is going to be a person to help save us, it's going to be us. And that is why we are here, to mourn with each other, to strengthen each other, to learn how to become better people. And that's part of perhaps what discipleship is.
Wow, Ben brought his preaching pants today. This is good stuff. But no, Ben, I mean, that's just a beautiful way to phrase it, because one of the things that I've got two quick thoughts. Number one, I think it's so vitally important when we almost have that apostolic recognition. We saw a little bit of this when Elder Holland acknowledged things like mental illness and depression, and the fact that he said, I've had that. It's a validation. And now you've got Elder Stevenson getting up there doing that same thing. It's this apostolic validation of we see it, and we don't have good answers, and it sucks. And so it's so powerful. The other thing that stands out is I had a very sharp and sensitive ear for anything related to COVID, since we've been in this situation now for a year. And I heard a few people say, I'm surprised they didn't talk more about it. This would have been on Saturday. And one of the thoughts that I had was, I wonder if they're not explicitly talking about it, but this theme of frankly, of death that we heard over and over again during General Conference, and the resurrection, I wonder if that was the way that they were going to address it. We're not going to talk about what's currently happening or the hardships that we're going through. We're actually going to talk about the hope that we can get through the resurrection, even through something as awful as COVID, and the lives that it's taken and the people that it's affected. Because, to what you were saying, Ben, what Elder Stevenson was saying, it's not fair sometimes. Sometimes very healthy people, bad things happen, and sometimes unhealthy people, you could be a smoker and go 90 years and still be fine. But I think by that, especially for it being on Easter Sunday, it was almost poetic to see, yes, this is how we're going to tie it all.
You know, so someone who is well acquainted with that, and I wish I had more women speakers to choose from, but Sister Roberto, if you have not seen, there's a 3-part series on YouTube that actually, we could probably find that and put it in the show notes. I think we've talked about it before, but a lot of what she mentioned from her own life's experience in her talk is covered in this kind of biographical reenactment of her life. And man, what a wonderful, special woman who just, I mean, the way she's well acquainted with grief. And so the empathy that she has is something that might be unmatched right now. I mean, it's really in a very special way. Right now, the working title, we'll see when it is printed in the magazine, but the working title is "The Grave Has No Victory." And I remember listening to her talk live, and I really liked, you know, we read that, what is it, that that death has no sting and the grave has no victory. And but I really like what she talked about, the pain of it being swallowed up. I wish I don't have the quote right in front of me, but it's one of the first things I'm going to look up when the entire text is published. But I loved the idea of the sorrow, the grief being swallowed up, because it's not that it goes away, but to me, the way she said it, I just kind of envisioned this embrace around it, this kind of caring that only the Savior can do. And it isn't about pretending that it isn't there. There it is. That the grave hath no victory and the sting of death is swallowed up in Christ. That's from Mosiah 16:8. And just that, that it's swallowed up, but it's still there.
Can I nerd out just a little bit on something in that regard? So one of the images that I learned about a while ago that I found so helpful to understand Christ's atonement is the imagery in the old Middle East of how powerful chieftains could use their influence and their money to pay the debts of people that were in need. So to very quickly set the scene, imagine it's a vast desert with no borders, no countries, no central government, and all you have is either roaming tribes or you had some little settlements where people lived. In the absence of any centralized government, that means that the only people that had power were the people that had reputation, because your reputation would precede you and it would go from city to city. And that meant that not even money itself was powerful, because you can't eat or drink money. When you're out there, the only thing that you can use is your connections with other people to make things work. And so Hugh Nibley tells stories of how he learned that if you were a traveler that was you're trying to make your way through a wilderness, and if people were assailing you or attacking you, as happened as you're going from town to town, because there's no central laws, and so you could get hit by thugs or pickpockets or whatever, you could run for help to the nearest big tent that you could find. And there was a particular catchphrase. I don't have the Arabic phrase in front of me, but there was a particular catchphrase that you could say as you approached the tent. That was basically a signal. It was basically begging for help, and it was basically saying to the master of the tent, "Please take me in. I'm literally falling on your knees."
So is this like in Pirates of the Caribbean when they would say parlay? Is that kind of what was going on there?
Yeah, that sort of idea. So everybody, and it was this cultural expectation that if you came to a tent and you were in need and somebody was chasing you and somebody was coming after you, you could fall on your knees to the chief or the sheik of this tent, and they could decide whether or not they were going to help you out. Like if they cast you out of their tent, they didn't let you in, then they would let you, the desert has its way with you, whatever. But if they decided to bring you in, they would quite literally take their robes, open it up, bring the person into them, and give them a physical embrace, and take their own robe and wrap it around the back of the person that was coming close to them, thereby physically saying, "I'm going to cover your back with my own robe," but also symbolically saying, "This person is under my protection. This person is now part of my family unit, and whatever debt that person has, no matter where they came from, I'm now going to pay it on their behalf." And it was part of this embrace when they come in and they say, "This is now who you are." Now that embracing and that paying of the debt got translated from the Arabic and then into Hebrew and Greek. And eventually that became a phrase that roughly translated as at one-ment or atonement. So when you see Lehi in the Book of Mormon saying, "The arms of his love are perpetually, and I am encircled about by the arms of his love," or "I've been embraced in the arms of my Savior," that's what they're talking about. This is also the same imagery that we see in the story of the prodigal son who has returned home to his father, and the father places a ring on his hand and a robe around his shoulder. It's the same idea that we see in temples when a person who represents God brings you into a ritual embrace, brings you in absolutely close to their bosom, and puts robes on your shoulders and say, "You're now part of my family." And so when I see this, it's saying that your past, no matter how painful, no matter how mournful, can be swallowed up in everything that chief has to offer. There it is, the kafata. I absolutely love it. So that's what stuck out to me. Thank you, Jenny.
So Ben, let me kind of stick with you really quick. Unless you had any more thoughts on General Conference that you wanted to talk about.
Elder Anderson, I have a lot of thoughts, and there are just lots of different ways to prevent abortion. So that's all. Just going to drop that right there. You're welcome. Please continue.
Okay. No commentary on that. I have a feeling we're going to come back to that one because if we don't, I've got thoughts on that. So Ben, let's jump over to you. what stood out to you about General Conference? Any thoughts, themes, anything that really you just wanted to riff on for a little bit?
You know, the one thing that I wanted to talk about was President Nelson's talk about doubts.
Ah, yes.
There is a phrase that has kind of become a little bit of a sticking point.
Well, can I just back up real quick? Because the talk, the theme of the talk was about faith, wasn't it? Was it about faith, or was it about doubts, or was doubts the thing that people kind of?
I mean, his talk was all completely about building faith in Christ, as it should be, and that part was wonderful. And there was one line in there that we seem to have gotten hung up on, and by we I mean myself, at least one other person somewhere out there on the internet. And, you know, maybe my thoughts or comments are addressed to just that one particular person. And, you know, I have to give this with a preamble that say, you know, I totally love and support President Nelson, and I am so glad for all that he and all the leaders do. And at the same time, I think it is incumbent upon us as faithful members of the church to realize where our weaknesses are as church members so we can help strengthen them. One of those weaknesses is learning how to give space to doubt, and to allow that doubt to have a valid place to be explored. So many times we treat doubt as if it was an infectious virus that could spread contagion to others. And we try to maintain a, quote, spiritual social distance of 6 metaphorical feet or greater. And we put on these masks and we try to stay away from people because we're afraid that if that doubt gets shared, then in some sort of infection type way, that doubt could start tipping the dominoes all the way down. Now, to their point, that has happened. I mean, let's not pretend that those sorts of things never exist, right? There have been people that said, well, I didn't know about XYZ until I talked to ABC. And because I did that, then, you know, now I have these things and I have these concerns. I think our core weakness is that we have made the mistake of placing doubt on the opposite end of the spectrum as faith, where we say that you either have faith or you have doubt, and there's nothing in between the two. And one of the problems is it doesn't exactly hold up scripturally, because the scriptures teach us that the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. So in other words, faith itself exists because doubt also exists. They're complementary. They're not replacing each other. That I have doubt and I have faith at the same time. And because the tension of those two ideas is deep in my heart and I can't separate the two, I'm then left with that choice. So it's because of our doubts that we seek to increase our faith. And growing in faith does not necessarily mean that doubts automatically diminish. It simply means that we choose to move forward towards greater certainty. I think that part of the problem with this is that Christianity as a whole, like to zoom way out, I think that Christianity for hundreds of years has an unfortunate inheritance of shame around the word doubt, right? We use the phrase, you're a doubting Thomas. That's been a low-level insult of faith and character for centuries, long before we came on the scene. We see phrases about Peter when he was sinking on the water saying, oh, thou of little faith, why did you doubt? And it makes us feel like doubting is wrong or shameful, or we are a failure, or that if we were good enough or somehow more obedient or we did more of the primary answers, then we wouldn't have doubted. And when that happens, when that feeling of doubt persists, we think that we can go through the primary answers and the motivations and that doubt would somehow magically dissolve. But then we go through those actions and the doubt still persists. And we're like, well, then now what? What am I supposed to do?
How much of that is also based on just the language and the rhetoric that we use within the church? How common is it for us to hear people bearing their testimony or giving a talk where they don't talk about, I believe? It's always, I know, I am certain of. And so that way it's almost phrasing this dichotomy to sit there and say, if you're not one, then you've got to be the other. There's no room for this. You
either believe or you don't. Yeah, we've reduced it in an effort to simplify, in an effort to identify threats and vulnerabilities, in an effort to bring a unity of faith. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to label those that don't fit the mold as somehow being other than. And one of the characteristics is those in the middle have 100% faith and those on the outside don't, and therefore the opposite of that is doubt. And I think this is really unfortunate because it does not allow us a safe space to say doubts are okay, doubts are normal, doubts are valid, doubts do not diminish who you are as a person. and let's find a way to accept and address that doubt in an atmosphere of faith and love, without making the person feel as if you're doubting, therefore you're doing something wrong, or you're lazy, or you didn't study hard enough, or you're just rehearsing these doubts over and over and over again because you don't really want to believe. For me, I think at the end of the day, sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
I was just going to say, Jenny, I wanted to bring you in on this really quickly because, not to cut you off, Ben, but like this is considered, we're going to go back to pro wrestling terms, this is the main event. This is the headline of General Conference, right? It's Sunday, it's the prophet, it's the last message for Sunday morning. And he's talking about this. So obviously it had a lot of eyeballs. And I want to know from your perspective, what did you think about his address? And what did you think about some of the reaction to his address?
I get that people were defensive about it. I understand. And, language is weird. And, Ben, when you talk about faith and doubt and how we've tended to polarize those two terms against each other, a synonym for doubt is disbelief, but another synonym for doubt is questioning. Another synonym for doubt is uncertainty, or even insecurity. And if we didn't have those things, would there be a need to study? I think is something that we ought to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
And even recognize, again, a kind of like, is it I, Lord? Am I lazy and lax in my gospel study? Probably. I don't like being called out on it publicly. But it's not that it's not a good reminder. I don't know that the delivery was received as warmly as I know it hurt a lot of people.
And to Stephen's point, to Stephen's point that he's mentioning right now, he says he didn't see that this way at all, that the prophet wasn't addressing post-Mormons or doubters. He was talking to all of us. I think there's a lot to that part of the wonderful challenge of General Conference is that, like we said about the political thing, it can become a bit of a Rorschach test, is that everyone's going to see this their own way. And that is perfectly okay. And the way that I saw it is not necessarily how Jenny or Brent or Stephen or Natalie or anybody else saw it. And that's fine. At the same time, for those that did see it that way, where do they go? And is there a place for doubters in this church? Is there a place for empathy and for understanding? I saw some other online discussions today where people were chewing this over and trying to figure out how to make sense of it. How do they resolve this tension? And one brother in particular shared his personal experience of how when he brought doubts to his church leaders out of possible fear or uncertainty or not knowing how to deal with the doubts, those leaders reacted very strongly and they withdrew membership from him. And it was a very tragic response that probably could have been handled differently. And I couldn't help but look at them and think, you know what? The only thing that I can do, I know that I cannot provide answers for everybody, and that's not my job. I know that I can't fix problems for everybody, and that's not my job. I'm not here to save anyone. The only thing that I can do is to make my little corner of Zion as welcoming, a loving, and accepting place as I can. And if I can offer a tiny bit of light, and if I can sit with a person in their darkness, if I can sit with a person in their doubt, if I can meet them where they are on that road, no matter where it is, and say, okay, you've got doubts, that's cool. You're still a brother. You're still a sister. Let's explore them together because it doesn't diminish you at all as a person. Let's find a way to resolve them. And if it does not stay with us, well, then guess what? You're still a brother and sister, and my love for you doesn't change at all.
So can I peel back the curtain just really quickly here, because I think it's important. So usually during the week, Ben and Jenny and John and I, we have an ongoing conversation based on what we want to plan for the show or whatever. And we had a lot of talks over General Conference weekend. Ben and I were kind of going at it back and forth about this talk because of what Ben's saying, and I've got a perspective on the talk as well. But I think that's really maybe the benefit of President Oak's talk or President Nelson's talk is to sit there and say, there's a lot to chew on here. And I hope that we don't get into a situation similar to the Oaks talk where you're going to believe what you want to believe. The phrase that he said that got a lot of people talking was stop increasing your doubts by rehearsing them with others. And I'll be honest, this was one that a lot of people picked up on. It was a very emotional response to this sentence by President Nelson for quite a few reasons. Part of the reason is for those who have experienced doubts, they felt like they were being called out. Now, wait a minute, I'm not rehearsing my doubts with them. I'm just trying to talk about it with people, which is what you're saying, right, Ben? Like, there are some people who are just trying to articulate the questions that they might have, right? At the same time, I'm not going to try and throw around my credentials here, but I've been doing this online Mormon thing for like 15 years now, okay? I've seen a lot of things happen. I've seen a lot of different groups, and when you've been doing it for a while, you see some trends. And one thing that I've seen is it is so common for people who might have legitimate, and I want to stress this, legitimate questions about certain uncomfortable things that have happened in our church's history. Those are legitimate questions, and I will also say sometimes we have not done a very good job at all, and we still don't do a good job addressing those questions because they're uncomfortable questions and people don't know about it, and et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, I cannot tell you how many people I've seen who have a simple question, don't get a good answer, and then go to a place where they can rehearse their doubts with other doubters. And what ends up happening is you get a groupthink and an echo chamber effect. What also ends up happening is within a lot of these groups, because it's all the same people and we're all looking for whatever we can get, scratch that little dopamine button in the back of our brain, we want to get the validation from others, because a lot of these people have not had the validation. They've been told, like Ben said and like Jenny said, it's shameful, it's wrong, how dare you, you should be certain you did all these things. I've seen a lot of awful things happen. I've seen marriages dissolve because someone had the audacity to say they have a couple of questions and things like that. I've seen people get cut off from their family, which is completely inappropriate. At the same time, I cannot tell you how many people I've seen that have completely gone down a very, very unhealthy road when it came to their doubts, their questions, and being involved with places that you can rehearse your doubts with other doubters. These people are not looking, I'm going to get myself in trouble, so I've already down the show, so I'm just going to go down there anyways, okay? There's a lot of people in that group who are not looking to really understand things and to navigate their faith. They're looking for their answer, their own individual answer. And I'll bring one up. I'll bring up the example of polygamy, okay? Polygamy has been seriously discussed and debated among actual academic scholars and people who do this full time for 60 plus years. Jimbo, who spent 20 minutes listening to a podcast that was 4.5 hours long and read a couple of Wikipedia articles, is not going to have the backing. But you know what? Jimbo's going to be able to tell you the things that you want to hear, because doing a lot of that work is hard and it's tiresome. I'm not saying that people with doubts are wrong or that they're lazy or that they're bad. I am saying everyone needs to rethink what exactly is your motivation for going in these groups. And I think that might be what President Nelson is trying to get at. Why are you going to places like that? Conversely, at the same time, and I want to make this explicitly clear, Ben's right. We got a lot of work we got to do in our own house. And I think that you're seeing attempts at that with things like the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Elder Ballard is someone, to me, who has made huge strides. I'm never going to forget his speech that he gave to the seminary and institute teachers, telling them, you got to learn this stuff. You can't just, I almost cursed there. You can't just like waft your way through it. You got to know this stuff, okay? And so,
Brad, there's no dump button here, so be careful there, buddy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Anyways,
I think the last thing that I would say on that is one of the models that I would love to see us do a better job of is recognizing that the faith journey is a journey, and that the stages of faith that we go through as humans all have different problems and they all have different answers to them. And that perhaps our oversimplification of what the straight and narrow path looks like, where we give the first 4 principles and ordinances of the gospel, which are still good and still true, those answers may not necessarily be universally applicable to a person who has done all the Mormon checklist things, right? Because a lot of these people that have expressed the concerns, it's very common for them to lead off with saying, I was born in the church, I did scouts, I did young men, I went on a mission, I married in the temple, I did all these things, ... So they list their credentials and they say, and then I still have doubts. As if they're saying, I did everything I was supposed to, and despite all of those things, I'm now in a faith crisis. Translation, how come I'm in a faith crisis? Like, I should not be here if I did those previous things. And I think what I want to do is to help reframe the expectation around that. So instead of saying, if you do all those things, you're never going to have a crisis. Instead, what I would like to say is, please, let's do those things. So when your faith transformation happens, you don't freak out as you realize that your caterpillar is turning into a butterfly. Because when you're in caterpillar mode and everything starts to dissolve and you're here in your cocoon of darkness and you're like, why is my world crumbling around me? I want to go back to caterpillar mode. What we're sitting here is on the other side trying to say, there is a new version of a butterfly that's struggling to come out of this chrysalis. And the only way to get through it is through. We may never, to use another analogy back, scriptures, we may never get back to the Garden of Eden, to that innocence, to that before taking the fruit. And maybe we were never supposed to. We were always supposed to go forward. We were always supposed to get out of it. So when that faith metamorphosis comes, when that faith crisis or transformation, or however we want to describe it, when that inevitably comes to somebody, we need to know that it's okay. That's part of the storm that we were talking about earlier. And the same answers that we had earlier are going to be helpful along that path. So let's give room for them and find ways to get through it.
So just really, we have actually legitimately had a few requests for merchandise. Number one, people want preacher pants. So I need to work on that. Number two, I think we need a t-shirt that says caterpillar mode, because I like that one. John, let me bring you in here. Anything stand out to you about the General Conference?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I want to say something really quickly, just to add to what you guys have been talking about. I may have shared this before.
I cede the floor to Jenny Noonan Dye.
Thank you, sir. I have a friend who was a branch president, and he had someone come into his office and say, I'm really struggling. I don't know if this is true. Kind of gave the checkoff list that you were not checkoff, but the checklist that you're talking about, Ben, all your credentials, and the bishop or the branch president said, okay, I have some questions for you. And he said, have you been attending all your meetings? And he's like, sort of. Okay, good. Have you been reading your scriptures? No. Okay, good. Have you been saying your prayers? No, it's been a long time. Good. And he's like, why good? And he's like, well, I mean, that's a relief. Like, if you're having struggles right now, it makes sense that your struggles would increase the more that you're doing not those things. And to me, when we hear President Nelson say to not, go to these other doubting places, on the one hand, I totally get it, because like you were saying, Brant, there's so much information out there that isn't accurate. And, and at the same time, if we're not making the effort, it's not, to me, it's not about having the doubts. We're all going to have the doubts. That's why we need to study. It's why we need to act in faith. It's about what you do when you have the doubts. And it's about, like we talked about, that we need to be better at, being the safe place for people to land, because the reality is the people want to feel validated in their feelings, whether they are generally known as being something positive or generally known as something being negative. And we tend to push away what is generally seen as negative because we've labeled doubt as such. And when we see, as we've heard before, not a problem to be solved, but a person to be loved, then the validation and the sincere love can come through. So
I like that.
Right.
You need to cede the floor to John Dye. We're doing this parliamentary style.
What?
Seed the floor.
Seed.
SCED.
Yeah, like plant seeds. Like.
John Dye, what do you got?
This is what I've got.
Oh, sweet.
We're moving there.
Oh, is that the Dye household?
You bet.
That's the next version of it. Yes.
Good heavens. People start buying your books, and now look at this.
Yeah, all our books.
Look at where we're at. Hey, just really quick, I'm going to put that up so I don't have to show my face, but this was President Nelson's Saturday morning address. This is how we kicked off conference, basically. And he gave a hat tip toward the Salt Lake Temple that's being renovated. And this is a quote. He says, as I have watched workers dig out old tree roots, plumbing, wiring, and a leaky fountain, I have thought about the need for each of us to remove, with the Savior's help, the old debris in our lives. And I thought this was pretty interesting. Number one, he didn't mention the removal of any of the murals, which was interesting to me. But my mind, as I was running, I was actually running at the time when I heard this, my mind went back to something C.S. Lewis wrote, and this is what I'll read. He says, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps you can understand what he is doing. He is getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you are not surprised. But presently he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he's building quite a different house from the one you thought of, throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. And I just thought through that a little bit as he was discussing that, because I thought that was quite interesting that, he was talking about getting rid of debris in our lives. And this reminded me, and Brant, I know you've mentioned it before on the podcast, but Hugh B. Brown, God is the Gardener, he gave this talk in 1968. This even predates me, you guys, when he talks about the currant bush. But yeah, this goes way, way back. But I'll just read that really quick because I thought this was really good. He says, could I tell you just a quick story of my own experience in life? 60 odd years ago, I was on a farm in Canada. I had purchased the farm from another who had been somewhat careless in keeping it up. I went out one morning and found a currant bush that was at least 6 feet high. I knew it was going all to wood. There was no sign of blossom or fruit. I had some experience in pruning trees before we left Salt Lake to go to Canada. My father had a fruit farm, so I got my pruning shears and went to work on the currant bush, and I clipped it and cut it down until there was nothing left but a little clump of stumps. I'll just go forward. He says, I thought I heard that currant bush speak. It seemed to say, how could you do this to me? I was making such wonderful growth. I was almost as large as the fruit tree and the shade tree, and now you have cut me down. And all in the garden will look upon me with contempt and pity. How could you do it? I thought you were the gardener here. I thought I heard that from the currant bush. I thought it so much that I answered it. I said, look, little currant bush, I am the gardener here, and I know what I want you to be. If I let you go the way you want to go, you will never amount to anything. But someday, when you are laden with fruit, you are going to think back and say, thank you, Mr. Gardener, for cutting me down, for loving me enough to hurt me. And I just thought about that again. That all goes back to a simple, something he said about debris. But again, we are being molded, right? That what we're given in this life is to help shape us into something that we should become and what our Heavenly Father knows we can become. So I leave that with you in the name.
All right.
All right.
Anything else from Saturday morning, John Dye?
Well, that goes to you.
No.
Okay.
No, John, we need to hear about what it was like listening to it. Did you actually listen to it on the radio? People still do that?
Hey, we love the radio. They've got stories. They've got the news. They've got weather.
And our matching recliners, we listen to it.
Can you tune the dial just a little bit? We're getting a little bit of static.
We only
all right, so what was it
because our record skips in them. Yeah,
what was it like listening to it on the radio?
So yeah, John is a runner, and on Saturdays is when he typically goes for his long run, which he did. And so he was out on a trail and listening to the radio. I had just finished a different mode of exercise and was driving to go pick up, cinnamon rolls. But I was in the car Yeah, I was in the car and I was also listening. Same radio station, by the way. And during Elder Uchtdorf's talk, for about, we're in Utah, right? So this was the Lord's radio station. And we were listening, and for about 15 seconds, it cut out. And what should we hear but Rock You Like a Hurricane? I mean, it was, the switch was, I was like, did I accidentally hit the knob? What happened? And so I stopped and I tweeted something about it, like, did anyone else hear that? And lo and behold, right after that, I saw a notification that somebody else stopped and also tweeted about it. So the two of us heard it. Anyone else out there listening on the Lord's radio station and hear that?
Yeah, we must be married, right?
You're going to have a lot of people that are like, what's a radio?
All right.
I get everything.
It's like a podcast.
Or Apple Music. Both are good. Both are fine.
Yep.
Okay. Do you guys mind if I throw a couple of quick thoughts out there?
Please.
First of all, any of you who listen to the podcast for a long time know that I love stats. We don't get a lot of stats sometimes from the church, except when it comes to someone like Garrett Gong, who decided to, I'm just going to like tell you all the things. For example, here are some of the things that he let us know. He let us know that Latter-day Saint membership has become increasingly internationalized during the past 40 years. Most adults in the worldwide church have been single, widowed, or divorced since 1992. Most adults in the United States and Canada have been single, widowed, or divorced since 2019. Latter-day Saint membership in Latin America is anticipated to surpass Latter-day Saint membership in the United States and Canada by 2025. The number of church members outside the United States and Canada surpassed the number of Latter-day Saints within the United States and Canada in 1998. So basically, it's all this data that a lot of us have been like, oh my goodness. And for a lot of us data nerds, we were like, stop. Can you just stop? Stop. I want to listen to this. But it was amazing because essentially what he was trying to do was he was trying to take it and put it all within the context of his message, which was a great message. I'm gonna say something. This might be controversial, okay? I love dark chocolate. I'm going somewhere with this, so just bear with me, okay? I love dark chocolate. I love about like 75% dark chocolate, so the fancy stuff you can get, right? Oh, Jenny, here's the other thing too. Milk chocolate does nothing for me. It's like plastic, okay? Like it's the stuff you get at the dollar store, right? Here's the thing about dark chocolate. I'm sorry, like Jenny is like sickened listening to this. I can see it on her face. Like I don't even know who you are anymore, Bran. Here's the thing about dark chocolate. As Jenny is inhaling. It looks dark, by the way. I'm just saying. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about dark chocolate. Dark chocolate, you can't just like snarf it and inhale it down like you do milk chocolate. Okay, all you heathens that eat your milk chocolate. You can't do that with dark chocolate. Dark chocolate, you take a little bit and you chew on it and you just kind of let it savor and you think about it a little bit. And then you take a little bit more. So you do it bit by bit. The reason why I bring this up is, to me, Garrett Gong is becoming like dark chocolate. Garrett Gong is great. You can't have all of Garrett Gong at the same time because it's like sensory overload. And I don't know if either of you feel this way or anyone listening, but like for me, what I like with Garrett Gong is being able to take a couple sentences here and there and just kind of stew on it and let it marinate. It's a lot of the same feelings that I had with someone like Neil Maxwell, who is the same way. The thing that I like about Garrett Gong is you can tell that there is an immense intellect there. I've never, ever gotten the sense in listening to all the speeches that he's done that he's ever talking down to someone. He is just calmly and clearly articulating. So anyways, Garrett Gong is one of my favorite people to listen to at General Conference.
So I think that's going to be our third T-shirt from this podcast. We've got Preacher Pants.
Yes.
We've got Gong is my dark chocolate.
And Gong is my dark chocolate. Yep, I like those.
You pray about that one.
Yeah, you know what? Ben, I think I will not be wearing Gong as my dark chocolate if I ever decide to go do a tour of Temple Square. I think I'm going to save that one. I'll wear that under the sweatshirt or something like that. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Neil Anderson needs to not talk about current events ever. Neil Anderson he's given I want to say the last conference he gave a great talk, but he has given about 2 or 3 talks, and this abortion talk was one of them that was just like, oh man, it's not doing very well. His first talk that I'm never going to forget was Give Brother Joseph a Break, which was not great, Bob. His second talk, I want to say, was a talk that was just effulgent in praise for President Nelson, which came across like, oh man, this is really weird. The problem that I had with his abortion talk was this. I actually was listening to it. We were eating dinner on Saturday. I had the TV on in the background so we could listen to it while we were eating dinner with the kids. And I had this like look on my face, and my wife is watching it or listening to it with me, and she goes, "What's going on there?" And I said, I mean, it's not bad, but it's not great. And here's the reason why it wasn't bad. There were quite a few things that he was talking about when it came to abortion that I agree with. I think that we should quit with the anti-abortion and be doing many more things that incentivize people to keep the life that's there. I think that we should be looking at maybe what Mitt Romney is doing as far as his child tax credit. That's a great idea. We should be looking at things like making sure that adoptive services are better, that we're providing women with the resources that they need. Crazy talk, Brant. Maybe we need to think about more robust sex education and contraceptive methods that could be available so that we don't have this. Because even for the women who are bringing children into this world that are unintended children, that's tough on them too, because that could upend their entire world. And I know it's a decision they made, but we can do things to stop it before that train gets to the station, or until that train docks at the station, if you will. Anyways, but the other thing that I wanted to bring up was he started going down this road of almost anti-abortion and bringing up almost culture wars that were talked about 30 years ago. And I think for me, that's where I wanted to stop and say, where is this going? I listen, I try and keep up on politics pretty frequently. There's a chance that Roe versus Wade might get challenged, or there's a chance that abortion might come up in front of the Supreme Court. They got quite a few other things on their docket, though. Like, I don't think that's happening anytime soon. So I'm just sitting here saying, where did this come from? Did you get that? I mean, Jenny, I know that you and I were talking about this a little bit. Like, am I alone in my thoughts and feelings? Maybe I'm alone on the train docking at the station part, but am I alone in my thoughts and feelings on Anderson's talk?
No.
Okay.
As a woman, ... I'm tired of the women, we adore you talks. I'm tired of it. And then to follow it up with, please don't have an abortion, please have a baby. Like, and I mean this sincerely. You two, you three, did you ever have talks or lessons as a teenage boy that included any version of don't get a girl pregnant? Meaning like in a church setting.
If so, I could probably count them on one hand if it ever happened at all. Yeah, and even then it was very scant and embarrassed and don't do the icky stuff. Okay, next, let's go play basketball.
Yeah, I think all of our chastity talks were either don't play with yourself or don't play with girls, but mostly don't play with yourself. That was basically it.
John Dye?
Never.
Yeah.
No.
So, because I mean, our human culture and American culture, which extends to the church culture, of that it is a female's responsibility to not get pregnant, and just the notion that, you know, I have so many thoughts, like I can't even get them out. I think you can sense that, and we don't have time.
No.
However,
no, yeah, I'm totally with you there, Jenny. I think, you know, the only thing that I would say onto this, in addition to everything that you're saying by not saying it, because I don't know, I think we read you loud and clear. I'm all for the people that have the uteruses to be making the laws and the discussions about this. Like this should not be me talking about it at all. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you.
I will say this, because I know that I kind of wrapped up my thoughts with, I don't know why we're talking about this. I will say this. One thing that was brought to my attention during his talk was particularly international abortion rates are going up. And again, if this is a worldwide church, if this is a worldwide audience, maybe that's something that he wanted to make sure that that he talked about. But on the whole, this is another area where maybe it's better for Neil Anderson to stick to like core gospel things, not hot button culture war issues, because it doesn't end well. It doesn't.
There's that line in D&C 21 where they were talking about Joseph Smith when God says to the early saints, these things you should take from his mouth as if that came from my own word, ... in all patience and faith. As if God is saying to the saints, he's like, guys, bear with me, but you just got to be patient with the guy. And I think that extends beyond Joseph Smith. It extends to all of us. And sometimes when I hear stuff like this, that's kind of the way that I feel. I'm like, okay, I got to be patient. That's part of my test of a discipleship. It's not to minimize or diminish the problems that can cause when they get it wrong.
Yep.
It's also to tacitly recognize that, we say so many times that leaders aren't perfect. Well, let's own that.
Yep,
let's literally own that. Let's say, okay, sometimes we don't say it as eloquently as we should. Sometimes we make mistakes. That includes everybody up and down the organization. And that doesn't mean they're not inspired.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that they're not men and women of God. It means they're normal, just like us. And the sooner that we can embrace that and accept it and move on, the sooner we'll get closer to Zion, whatever that is.
You're absolutely right. And I really like what Stephen is saying. He grew up in the South, and so many talks about not having sex, like we talked about, purity culture, having a purity prom and all that stuff. And that's true. I think the point I'm trying to get to is just, if we're going to have a talk about abortion, one, let's have it from a woman, maybe starting. And secondly, let's acknowledge things like, again, what is entailed and what is required to prevent a pregnancy in the first place. I mean, for men, you guys, you legit can just go into a store, like a 24-hour open store, and I have to make a doctor appointment for maybe 6 weeks out and then wait a month. And if I don't remember to take a pill that will make me crazy, if I don't remember to take it at the same time every day, that's my option. And I could go on and on and on. You know what I'm saying. So I just, thank you, Brant, for saying that. And also thank you, Ben, for saying that, because I know that for myself, I need to allow for whoops. It's such something that's so I have a lot of feelings about, especially just as I get older and see more things, and so that was a rough one for me to hear.
Yeah.
So then let me try and make it a little bit better.
Yeah.
I've got to know, was everybody else like this warm little puddle of goo on Sunday morning, seeing President Nelson explicitly request, I'd like an international global reflection of our faith on Sunday morning's general conference? It was, I'm not even joking, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I made a controversial hot take on Twitter that maybe we should think about scaling the MOTAB back, because hearing all these international choirs was beautiful. Seeing the different reflections of our faith through all the different types of people that were out there were beautiful. I was sobbing with the South Koreans that were singing in the very beginning, because I'm like, that's my people. I love that. But even I am a child of God in all those different languages was beautiful.
Oh.
And then to follow it up with all the different speakers from all over the world, bringing amazing experiences, and not just, hey, I'm going to try and apologies for this. I'm going to say a pioneer story, even though I'm Elder Wakolo, who lives in Fiji. He didn't do that. Instead, what they did was they brought their individual experiences in there and stories from their individual region. And I know we've talked about this. That representation matters so much. And I love the fact that President Nelson specifically said, I want this to reflect our global church. To me, that is such a powerful message. This wasn't just, you know what, we'll squeeze them in here and there. It was, no, specifically these individuals from all over the world, I'd like them in here.
That is beautiful.
So anyways, that was amazing. The entire Sunday morning session, even President Nelson's address at the very end, because I think that it's probably something that I'm going to have to read and think about more, because I was caught up in the moment when I was reading it, but like the whole thing was just beautiful. So, okay. With that, everybody, let's go around. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for doing a little Mormon News Report family home meeting with us on this Monday evening, if you will. Ben, if we want to hear more about you, if we want to potentially contact you to come and preach by doing a fireside, which you do, where can we find you and how can we get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ben Bernards. I actually have a couple of virtual firesides that I've lined up. One of them is for a couple of families that heard me at a youth conference several years ago, and so we're doing ironically enough, a Law of Chastity youth fireside for a family. Yeah, and then we have another one that I do that's all about temple preparation and scripture symbolism that I'm doing for some new young prospective missionaries and their families. So it'll be awesome. So yeah, I'd love to do something for you and your congregation. So feel free to hit me up.
So if anyone's interested in having Ben come by, you could do apparently you could do a fireside for an individual family, a congregation, a stake. Get in touch with you on your social media, right?
Yep.
So if we don't want to teach our kids about the birds and the bees, we just call Ben up. Is that right?
I've got a couple of slides. We've got some diagrams, some animated GIFs, one or two memes that we throw in there, and we top it off with a TikTok video and a YouTube link. It all makes sense.
All right.
I expect nothing less. Jenny, what about you? Where can we find you?
Oh, I'm around. I'm on Facebook, Jenny Noonan Dye like you dye your hair. Also on Twitter and on Instagram, my hashtag is @formerlyfred. That's FORMERLYPHREAD. I also have a Formerly Fred Facebook page and a Zumba with Jenny Dye Facebook page. Just like I said, I'm everywhere.
Just everywhere. Speaking of everywhere, what about the stately John Dye, the wizard behind the scenes who makes this all run so smoothly?
Yeah, I'm literally behind the scenes at Daijo. Yep, just on Twitter.
DYEJO.
DYEJO.
You're not just on Twitter.
Well,
and if you're interested in contacting the show, you can send us an email, if people still do that, maybe when they're listening to the radio, mail@mormonnewsreport.com. You could find us on Facebook, which you've already found us if you're watching us. Just search for Mormon News Report, or you could find me on Twitter @The Mormon News. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, John. Thank you, all of our wonderful listeners who decided to chime in for our Facebook Live. And all who listen, we'll talk to you again after a while.